Whether you're a higher belt who's never competed, a lower belt who's going into his first tournament, or even if you have done a few tournaments, I've narrowed it down to 3 simple strategies, which we'll get into. I think if you can simplify something that a lot of people overcomplicate, it takes a lot of weight off of the shoulders. What's going on, guys? Giancarlo Bodoni here for another video, and today we're going to talk about a topic that I get asked about a lot. That topic is how you can prepare for your first BJJ tournament. It's a question that I get asked a ton, and recently I had a couple of my students. For those of you guys that don't know, I teach classes here in Cedar Park, Texas, almost every evening. I have a lot of students, the majority of which are relatively beginner, white and blue belt level. Most of them have not competed and they're getting into their first tournament. But I'd say for the majority of cases, it's more so along the lines of lower belts. But regardless of whatever the situation is, whether you're a higher belt who's never competed, a lower belt who's going into his first tournament, or even if you have done a few tournaments and you want to compete again, it's something that you're unfamiliar with, I think these things can help you. Okay, this is a question that I get asked a lot, and this is a conversation that I had with one of my students today, actually. I've narrowed it down to 3 simple strategies, which we'll get into. I think if you can simplify something that a lot of people overcomplicate, it takes a lot of weight off of the shoulders for whatever. All right, everybody, March 1st through the 4th, I will be hosting a jiu-jitsu retreat on the island of Kauai. We're gonna have 2 sessions of jiu-jitsu a day led by myself. We're going to have a bunch of different planned excursions, hikes, exploring the island, checking out different beaches. We have a Nepali coast tour planned, so we're gonna go on a boat and check out the Nepali coast, which is an incredible place. It's such a beautiful island. We're gonna be doing jiu-jitsu with a bunch of really cool people from all over the world. So I really hope you guys can join us. If you want more information, check out the link in the description. I hope to see you guys there, and for now, enjoy the rest of the video. A lot of weight off of the shoulders. For whatever reason, jiu-jitsu competitions seem to put a lot of weight and pressure on people, okay? And first thing I tell people is, I'm like, it's just a fucking grappling tournament, nobody cares. But you wanna win, you wanna do well, and therefore you think to yourself, well, you should prepare for this tournament somehow. Maybe you've never done anything competitive in your life. You've been doing this sport that's been making you feel good, making you happy. Maybe a couple of your buddies in the gym are going into a local tournament. There's an ADCC Open coming up in a few weeks. You wanna sign up, you wanna make the commitment for it, and you now all of a sudden think, I need to now prepare for this tournament. And the first piece of advice I tell people, and they usually shake their head when I say this, is do nothing different, okay? Literally, don't change a thing, nothing about your training, with a few exceptions, which we're gonna touch on in a little bit. But basically, when you go into your first tournament, if you've never competed before, or if you've only done a couple of tournaments and all of a sudden you're feeling like you need to prepare for it, first thing you want to do is, okay, that's a good feeling, because one, that's a good sign, I would say, especially if I'm hearing that from a coaching perspective, because it means that they want to do well, okay, right? You don't want to just go to a tournament for the hell of doing it. Ideally, you're trying to win that tournament. You're trying to win in an exciting and in a fashion that's going to, make you proud of your performance. So when I say don't do anything different, it's like, okay, that's confusing to a lot of people. The reason why I think it's important to not change anything about the way that you train is because you want to go into that first tournament just completely as is, just with no specific preparation, we'll say. I don't even recommend changes in lifestyle and diet, weight cutting, all of those things, those are things that, if you're trying to improve for that specific tournament, you should just be trying to improve those things in general, in my opinion. And so if you're trying to make lifestyle improvements for the tournament, I think they should just be lifestyle improvements in general, not specifically for the tournament. And then as time goes on, you can tweak things here and there. Just go in, no pressure, no expectations, trying to win, but do the tournament. That way, you can actually see how the outcome was based on what your baseline level of lifestyle and training already is. Take a look at the outcome, and then from there, you can take that data, you can take that information, and you can make adjustments to it for potentially the next one. I would definitely recommend because of what I just said, to record your training footage. Okay, if your family goes to watch you, a friend goes to watch you, some tournaments you can even, you're by yourself, you can even set up a little tripod on the judges table. I see many people do that, and that's just a good way to record the match so you can actually see what you need to change from a technical and a tactical perspective. You can take that information and say, I want to work on these skills in the gym. Now all of a sudden you can work on those things in the gym and you can potentially go in to another tournament, okay? This brings me to something that I talked about in a video that I did a while back, which is how to get better at jiu-jitsu faster, which I'll leave the link for somewhere around here and in the description. That was a video that I got a lot of positive feedback on because of one thing that I said in that video, which was training with intention. And so if you take that footage from that tournament that you did, your first tournament, now all of a sudden you're going into the training room and you're saying, I want to work on these things. That's intention. That's a very, very good way to build skills faster. So first piece of information, do nothing differently. With a few exceptions, which we're going to talk about in a second, that will just put you a little bit closer, set you up for a little bit more of that success that you're most likely looking for, which is trying to go out there and win. Now we talked about training with intention. Okay, I'm going into my first tournament. You said don't train differently, but what you should do is absolutely train with consistency and commit. Commit to train. You've committed to the tournament, commit to your training. Okay, and that means if you can only train 3-4 times a week, then you are training 3 or 4 times a week. If you can only train 2 days a week, then you are training 2 days a week, no matter what. Obviously, more is better. You know, your training is going to be kind of contingent upon your lifestyle and your responsibilities. So there's a bunch of factors there. I'm not going to say that you need a minimum amount of days training, but the more training you can get in, obviously, the better it is. So if you feel the need to, hey, you've only been training 3 days a week consistently, if you have the opportunity to train 4, train 4. If you have the opportunity to train 5, train 5, and so on. But whatever you choose to do, if you say, I'm getting ready for this tournament, it's in 6 weeks, I can train 3 days a week for it. Only 3 days a week, that's all I can do. Is that enough? Yeah, just make sure you do those 3 days a week no matter what. You're committed to those 3 days a week and there's no birthday parties getting in the way. There's no, I'm tired and I don't feel like training. There's no, I had a bad day at work. When you make the commitment to compete, you make the commitment to train. And the reason why this is important is because I often see this from hobbyist, recreational, amateur level, all the way up to a professional level, and you'll see that people begin to kind of self-sabotage their own training and their own competition as kind of an excuse or at least a preparation for a bad result. You're kind of preparing the excuse for you not getting the result that you want. For who it is, it's not for the people around you, because I don't think it really matters to them whether or not you win or lose. I think it's more of a personal thing. So I always say, when you make that commitment to compete, make the commitment to train no matter what. Don't bring up the, you know, work's getting in the way and I can't train for whatever. And it may even be true, but do your absolute best to try to avoid that excuse and self-sabotage. And if you need to auto-adjust and auto-regulate, you know, your training and your schedule a little bit, that's okay. But if you make that commitment, do it. Do the training with consistency. You're not training with any specific intentions, right? Any specific adjustments in particular that you're looking to make in the lead up to that tournament. It's more so about the fact that you've made that deal with yourself, and therefore whatever deal that is that you made, you stick to it up until that destination that we're looking to go to, which is that tournament, okay? And if you feel tired going into a training session, you know, had a long day, maybe didn't eat well enough or whatever the case was, got a bad night's sleep, etc., still do your best to go into it. I'm not going to try and promote this idea that you got to just push harder no matter what and whatever the case is, because I don't believe that to be the case. All I am saying here is that in the lead up to your first tournament, do it as much as you can and try your best to push through those little speed bumps and excuses that you might tell yourself, because in the long run, you can always change those things. You learn from that experience. Hey, I wasn't able to handle this specific amount of training or training volume or training intensity or whatever that I was doing. Let's adjust it for the next one. You get more and more information that way, okay? But if you're changing things constantly and there's inconsistent variables, it's hard to make those adjustments. So do it consistently so that later on, if you need to change a variable, it'll actually be noticeable. And you're accountable for the result, right? The only change that I would make to a tournament preparation, if it's your first couple of tournaments, is to a certain degree recreating a tournament environment. Now, even at a professional level, you're never going to be able to truly recreate the tournament environment. We all train in a room with 20, 30 people rolling around you, no lights on you, no cameras, no announcers. You're not filming it most of the time. So it's a familiar environment that is unlike a competition. However, there are a few things that you can do that I think, especially early on in your first couple of tournaments, will make a difference in terms of you just not freezing when you get to a competition, okay? And the first one is actually going to be something that most gyms don't do, which is start standing. Starting standing, I think, is just one thing that if you don't do it regularly in your gym, literally just starting standing. You don't even have to work on takedowns. You don't even have to do takedowns to win a jiu-jitsu tournament, right? But just the act of starting the match standing, even most gyms don't even do it once a week, okay, let alone once a day. But even just being able to do that with some degree of regularity, it's gonna make you more familiar with that when you actually get to the match. If you can go into your live rounds and literally just say start on the feet. I mean, if you want to grapple on the feet, that's great. But if you're not somebody that wants to grapple on the feet, you prefer to play down on the ground, you can always sit to guard. Okay, you can always you can bring the match to the ground without doing takedowns. But just starting on the feet, very often I'll see people only train on the ground. They go into their first tournament and they freeze just because of that one difference of starting on the feet. The second thing that I would recommend in terms of recreating, right, that tournament environment, right, we're trying to recreate that tournament feeling, is going to be don't accept points. This is another thing that, again, with time and experience, you will gain a tactical understanding of competitions, and points are it's kind of a more of a generalization, right? Because the points are going to change, the point scoring criteria is going to change depending upon the type of competition you do, and there's even sub-only tournaments that don't even have points, right? So this is more so kind of a generalization of how to approach rounds in the gym in the lead up to a tournament, and just in general if you plan to compete regularly, right? But since you're trying to win a tournament, right, you don't want to get scored on, okay? So not accepting points is kind of a generalization, right? There are various different point scoring criteria depending on the federation and this, that, and the other. And so what I try to narrow it down to in a very, very simple and almost embarrassingly childlike sense, especially for beginners, but this is just kind of like an overall very, very generalization. If you're on top of somebody, stay on top in either chest to chest or chest to back. If you're on bottom, try to get on top. And when you get on top, stay on top with your chest on their chest or your chest on their back. And the third one, do not rest when you are in a vulnerable position, okay? Do not rest in a position where you have the potential to be scored on and or submitted, okay? It sounds very obvious when you are in the heat of a competitive round and or match in a tournament. The simpler the thought process, the better. All of those things that I taught you have a rabbit hole of different technique and tactics that we could spend hours upon hours talking about. As a matter of fact, I mentioned two of those, chest to chest and chest to back, which I have maybe 30 plus hours of instructional footage on those topics, okay? And the reason why I say those two positions, right, is because they're the foundation of the most dominant pins in the sport, the mount position and the back position. They're the most high percentage scoring positions. And therefore, if you can simplify in the mind of somebody who's in the heat of battle, chest to chest and chest to back, on top, stay on top, little things like that, little subtle cues, it makes it so much simpler. And all the stuff that you studied and trained and all the techniques that you learned in the heat of that moment when you really don't have time to think will naturally kind of fall into place if you followed the simple cues, right? So that's kind of the idea behind that oversimplification of those three things that I mentioned to you, and how it ties back to not accepting points and recreating this tournament environment is the fact that when you're in a match, those are the things that are going to help you win, right? When you're in a bad position, this is a situation that actually happened to me today in the class that I taught before filming this video. I had a student who has done a few tournaments, and we were doing our live rounds and they were on the feet, and one of the guy that he was sparring with double-legged him, put him on his butt. He tried hard to fight the takedown. The guy had a tight waist. He circled around the turtle. He kept fighting, got all the way up into a 4-point. The guy had him in a front headlock, and then he stopped moving. And then what happened? The guy dragged him down to his knees, circled behind him, took his back, and then eventually he ended up getting tapped. He was tired. He'd just sparred for 30 minutes prior to that. It was the last round of the day. I totally get it. And so when I sat down and I talked to him after class to discuss the training, which I'll often do when I watch my students, is I'll watch them, and if I can give them a tip about a position that they were in or whatever the case is, I'll usually do that. And I was talking to this student of mine, and I explained to him, I said to him, it's like, listen, do your absolute best, because again, he likes to compete, and he's one of the guys that's going to be competing recently, or soon. And so I said, do your absolute best to not rest when you're stuck in a front headlock, when you're stuck in turtle, when you're gotten taken down and you feel like you're dead to rights and you're going to get scored on. If you can just kind of ingrain that, I don't like to coach mentalities because I don't believe it's the best way to go forward, but it is to a certain degree a mentality that you're not going to accept that position. You're not going to stop moving until you're at the very least in a neutral position, and even best in a scoring position. There is a ton of technique that he most likely needs to learn in order for him to not allow that to happen to him again. Just because I tell him, hey, don't stop moving until you're out, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen, right? But I'm just laying the foundation up here for him to see that change. As sessions go on, I'll start feeding little nuggets of information, techniques, maybe pull him aside, show him a few things, maybe base a class off of those topics, especially because it's something that, I think a lot of people struggle with. But if you are preparing for your first tournament and you can do a few things like that, that just changes your approach to just your basic normal rounds in training. You're sparring with somebody and you feel like you're going to get swept, and you do whatever it is that you can and whatever it is that you know. Again, there's a multitude of techniques, but if you can either inform yourself or do your best to not let that score happen, it's just going to get you into that tournament mode, okay? And so While I don't like to necessarily preach or coach mentalities, because I think it's going to vary from person to person, and the ultimate deciding factor between winning and losing, both in the gym and competition, is your overall skill set, it's a good place to start laying the foundation. The last thing that I will add to that is try to score first. If you can score first, that'll just put you ahead of the game. And again, if you're starting around on the feet, whether you decide to pull guard or take your training partner down, if you can just get into that mentality of scoring first and putting your opponent on the back, making him have to chase you, let's say, that'll again just give you a little bit of an edge. So that was a lot of information. Ultimately, I still stand, even though I told you guys to do this, okay, to recreate a tournament environment, I don't believe you should change anything about your training structure. I just believe that when you approach your day-to-day normal rounds the way that you normally would, try to do these things, you know, occasionally start on the feet, even if you don't like takedowns. Try your best to not get scored on. Remember the 3 things that we talked about. If you're on top, stay on top and try to get your chest on their chest or your chest on their back, okay? The essential connections for the most dominant positions in the sport, okay? I have an entire instructional series that is based on those topics, probably 30 plus hours of footage, which you can find on BJJ Fanatics. I will leave the link to that in the description here somewhere on the screen, most likely, okay, but it'll be in the description. If you are on bottom, try to get on top, and in turn, stay on top, chest to chest, chest to back. And if you are in a bad position, do not rest. Only rest when you get to chest or chest to back. Maybe potentially in a neutral position, but I would generally recommend in a position of advantage, which is those ones that I talked about. Don't accept points and score first. Will you get scored on? Absolutely yes. Will you always score first? Absolutely not. Just something that you can keep in mind and when approaching your training. Train with consistency, commit to the thing that you signed up for, okay? You signed up to go to a destination, you are going to commit, okay, to the training that you have set up. And if you have to take your ass kickings on the way, you take your ass kickings on the way. You have a mental or maybe even a written log of, you know, what happened on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis, whatever the case was. You have information, you have your competition. Then from there, you can make adjustments and adaptations for future ones. And lastly, I think this is the most important thing. Don't put so much pressure on a competition, especially if it's your first tournament, your first couple of tournaments, and especially if it's not your life depending on it, right? When you're not competitive athletes, don't put so much pressure. Even myself, that I literally do this for a living, I always tell myself, it's all the same. You do it every single day in the training room. Why would it be any different in competition? Almost, because it is a little bit different, right? You can't recreate the tournament the same way it's going to be every single time, but it's pretty much the exact same thing. You do jiu-jitsu every single day, you like it, you're good at it, just go do it the same way that you would every single day, only this time in a different place at a different time. So that was my advice, my own personal opinion on preparing for your first jiu-jitsu tournament. Really appreciate you guys sticking to the end of the video. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate all the support. Leave a comment in the comment section. That really helps boost the algorithm, in turn growing the channel even more. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to check out my links in the description. We have BJJ Fanatics instructionals down in the link below. We have Future Kimonos, personalized gear, my own personal line on Future Kimonos. I have a big camp coming up in Kauai, Hawaii, March 1 through 4. There's still a few spots remaining, so if you want to go and do jiu-jitsu with me at an awesome place, you can click the link to that to sign up, learn more. Make sure to check out my affiliate link to 8 Sleep, okay? You get $150 off of your purchase, and we'll see you guys in the next video.